The last time Nora Hartford saw her reflection in something other than a dirty puddle was 3 weeks ago, and even then, she had looked away quickly, unable to bear the sight of what grief had carved into her features. She stood now at the edge of Seligman, Arizona territory, a small collection of buildings that seemed to shimmer in the August heat of 1883. Her cotton dress torn at the hem and covered in the fine desert dust that had become as familiar to her as breathing. The sun beat down mercilessly as she surveyed the town with hollow eyes, wondering if this place would finally offer some kind of salvation, or if it would just be another stop on her seemingly endless journey toward nowhere. Her husband had died 4 months ago, back in Missouri, caught in a fever that swept through their small farming community like wildfire. Thomas had been a good man, steady and kind, but they had been married only a year before death claimed him. His family, never warm to the marriage in the first place, had wasted no time in claiming the farm as their own, leaving Nora with nothing but a small bag of belongings and enough money for a stagecoach ticket west. Her own parents had passed when she was 16, leaving her alone in the world even before Thomas came along. Now, at 22 years old, she found herself truly adrift, with no money, no prospects, and no idea what she was supposed to do next. The stagecoach had deposited her here 2 hours ago, the driver barely glancing her way as she climbed down with her worn carpetbag. She had paid the last of her coins for passage, thinking perhaps she could find work in one of these frontier towns, maybe as a seamstress or a cook. But Seligman was smaller than she had imagined, just a handful of structures built along the dusty main road. A saloon stood at one end, its painted sign faded by the relentless sun. A general store occupied the middle, flanked by what looked like a boarding house and a small office that might have belonged to a doctor or a lawyer. Beyond that, scattered houses dotted the landscape, and in the distance, she could see the shapes of cattle moving slowly across the scrubland. Nora walked toward the general store, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Her stomach had been empty since yesterday morning, and thirst made her tongue feel thick in her mouth. She pushed open the door, hearing the bell jangle above her head, and stepped into the relative coolness of the interior. The smell of leather, tobacco, and coffee hit her all at once, making her stomach clench with hunger. An older woman stood behind the counter, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked up as Nora entered, her eyes taking in the younger woman's disheveled appearance with obvious disapproval. Nora tried to straighten her posture to look more presentable, but she knew it was hopeless. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her tone suggesting she doubted it. "I am looking for work," Nora said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can sew, cook, clean. I am a hard worker and I learn quickly." The woman's expression did not soften. "We do not have much need for extra hands here. Most folks do their own cooking and cleaning. If you are looking for that kind of work, you might try the saloon, though I would not recommend it for a lady." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. She knew what kind of work the saloon offered women, and it was not the kind she was looking for. "Is there nothing else? Perhaps someone needs help with children, or maybe the boarding house needs assistance." The boarding house is run by Mrs. Patterson, and she manages just fine on her own. As for children, most of the families here take care of their own. The woman paused, studying Nora with a calculating look. "Where are you from?" "Missouri originally. My husband passed away recently." "I see. And you came all the way out here alone." The disapproval in her voice was unmistakable. "I had nowhere else to go," Nora said quietly. The woman shook her head. "This is no place for a woman alone, especially one with no means. You should have stayed where you had people who knew you. Out here without protection or money, well, Let us just say things can go poorly very quickly. Nora wanted to argue, to explain that there had been no one left who knew her, no one who cared whether she lived or died, but she sensed it would make no difference. She thanked the woman quietly and left the store, stepping back out into the punishing heat. The street was mostly empty, just a few horses tied up outside the saloon and a wagon being loaded with supplies near the store. Nora felt desperation rising in her chest like water threatening to drown her. She had no money for food or lodging, no prospects for work, and nowhere to go. The realization that she had made a terrible mistake coming here settled over her like a heavy blanket. She walked slowly toward the edge of town, not sure where she was going but unable to stand still. Her vision blurred slightly from hunger and fatigue, and she stumbled over a rut in the road, catching herself before she fell. When she looked up, she saw a man on horseback watching her from about 20 yards away. He sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun, but even from this distance she could tell he was young, probably close to her own age. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a faded shirt, and a leather vest. His horse, a sturdy bay mare, stood patiently as he observed her. For a moment, neither of them moved, and Nora felt suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. Then he urged his horse forward, closing the distance between them with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. As he drew closer, Nora could see his face more clearly. He had strong features, tanned from long hours in the sun, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, and they studied her with an expression she could not quite read. "You look like you could use some water," he said, his voice low and calm. He reached for his canteen and held it out toward her. Nora hesitated, pride warring with desperate thirst. Pride lost. She took the canteen with shaking hands and drank deeply, the water cool and sweet in her parched mouth. She forced herself to stop before she drained it entirely, handing it back with a murmured thanks. "You just get into town?" he asked. "Yes, a few hours ago." "Got a place to stay?" Nora shook her head, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. The man was quiet for a moment, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "My name is Samuel Norton. I work at the ranch about 5 miles north of here. My boss, Mr. Crawford, he and his wife sometimes need help with various things around the place. Cannot promise anything, but if you are looking for work, I could ask them." Hope flared in Nora's chest, so sudden and intense it almost hurt. "I would be very grateful," she managed to say. "My name is Nora Hartford," Samuel nodded. "Well, Miss Hartford, why do not you wait here a moment? I need to finish some business in town, but then I can take you out to the ranch. Mrs. Crawford will want to meet you before making any decisions." "I do not want to impose," Nora started, but Samuel shook his head. "No imposition. Better than you standing out here in this heat with nowhere to go." He swung down from his horse with fluid ease and handed her the reins. "Hold onto Rosie here for me. I will be back in 10 minutes. Before Nora could protest, he was striding toward the general store, leaving her standing alone with his horse. She looked at the mare, who turned her head to regard Nora with large, gentle eyes. Despite her exhaustion and worry, Nora found herself smiling slightly. At least the horse did not seem to judge her. True to his word, Samuel returned quickly, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. He stowed it in his saddlebag and then looked at Nora thoughtfully. "You ever ridden a horse before?" "A little when I was younger." "Good. Rosie here is gentle as a lamb, but it is still 5 miles to the ranch, and I do not think you are in any condition to walk it." He climbed back into the saddle and then reached down toward her. "Give me your hand." Nora stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, realizing what he was offering. She would have to ride with him, sharing his saddle. It seemed terribly forward, almost improper, but what choice did she have? She placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers as he pulled her up behind him with seemingly no effort at all. "Hold on," he said simply, and Nora wrapped her arms around his waist, trying to ignore how solid he felt beneath her hands, how she could feel the warmth of him through his shirt. She told herself it was purely practical, nothing more, but she could not help the way her heart beat a little faster as Samuel urged Rosie into an easy walk. They rode in silence for a while, leaving the small cluster of buildings behind and heading north into the open country. The landscape stretched out around them in shades of brown and gold, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted tree. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the afternoon heat. It was so different from Missouri, so vast and empty, that Nora felt almost overwhelmed by it. "First time in the territory?" Samuel asked, his voice breaking the silence. "Yes, it is very different from what I am used to." "Where are you from originally?" "A small farming town outside of St. Louis. Nothing special." "What brought you all the way out here?" Nora hesitated, not sure how much to say. "I was recently widowed. There was nothing left for me back there, so I thought I would try to make a fresh start." She felt him nod slightly. "Sorry for your loss. Thank you." They fell silent again, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Nora found herself relaxing slightly, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of the sun on her back. Despite her dire circumstances, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, there was something almost peaceful about this moment. Perhaps it was simply the relief of not being entirely alone anymore, even temporarily. "The Crawfords are good people," Samuel said after a while. "They have been running their ranch for about 15 years now. Mr. Crawford started with just a handful of cattle, but he has built it up into something substantial. They have got about 500 head now, maybe more. Mrs. Crawford, she is a kind woman, fair-minded. If she thinks she can use your help, she will treat you right." "How long have you worked for them?" "Going on 3 years now. I came down from Colorado looking for steady work. Mr. Crawford took a chance on me, taught me everything I know about ranching. He is a good man to work for, does not ask anything of his hands that he would not do himself." "And you like it here? In Seligman, I mean?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, as if considering the question carefully. "It is not an easy life, and this country can be harsh, but yes, I like it well enough. There is something about this land, the way it stretches on forever, the way you can see storms coming from miles away. It gets into your blood after a while." Nora tried to see the landscape through his eyes, to find the beauty he seemed to perceive in this harsh, unforgiving place. All she saw was emptiness and heat, but perhaps that was because she had not yet learned to look properly. As they rode, Samuel pointed out various landmarks: a distinctive rock formation that marked the boundary of Crawford land, a dry creek bed that would run with water during the rare rains, a stand of cottonwood trees that indicated a spring. Nora listened, trying to absorb the information, sensing that knowing this land might become important to her survival. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 45 minutes, buildings began to appear on the horizon. As they drew closer, Nora could see that the Crawford Ranch was more substantial than she had expected. A large main house stood at the center, built of wood that had weathered to a soft gray. Several outbuildings surrounded it: a barn, a bunkhouse, what looked like a smokehouse, and various corrals. Cattle dotted the landscape in every direction, their brown and white bodies stark against the golden grass. Samuel guided Rosie toward the main house, and as they approached, the door opened and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was perhaps in her early 40s, with brown hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple dress with an apron, and her face, though lined from years of sun and hard work, held a warm expression. "Samuel," she called out in greeting. "I was not expecting you back until this evening." Samuel swung down from the saddle and then reached up to help Nora down. Her legs felt shaky as her feet touched the ground, and she had to steady herself against Rosie for a moment. "Mrs. Crawford, this is Miss Nora Hartford. She just arrived in town today, looking for work. I thought maybe you might be able to use some help around here." Mrs. Crawford's eyes moved to Nora, taking in her bedraggled appearance with an assessing but not unkind gaze. "Is that so? What kind of work are you looking for, Miss Hartford?" Nora straightened as much as she could, trying to look capable despite her exhaustion. "Anything you need, madam. I can cook, clean, sew, tend to gardens. I am willing to learn whatever else might be required." "She came all the way from Missouri," Samuel added. "Just lost her husband." Something softened in Mrs. Crawford's expression. "I am sorry to hear that, dear. That is a terrible burden to carry, especially so far from home." She was quiet for a moment, studying Nora thoughtfully. "Truth is, I could use some help. My daughter Martha usually assists me with the household work, but she just got married last month and moved to her husband's family ranch about 30 miles from here. I have been managing on my own, but with the hands to feed and all the preserving that needs doing this time of year, an extra pair of hands would be welcome." Relief flooded through Nora so intensely that she felt tears prick at her eyes. "I would work very hard, madam. I promise you would not regret it." "I am sure I would not. Come inside, let me show you around. Samuel, would you let Mr. Crawford know we have got a new member of the household? He is out checking the north fence line." "Yes, madam." Samuel tipped his hat to both women and led Rosie toward the barn. Mrs. Crawford gestured for Nora to follow her into the house. The interior was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and clean floors. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large table that could easily seat a dozen people, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. Doors led off to what Nora assumed were bedrooms and perhaps a pantry. "We have got 6 ranch hands right now, including Samuel," Mrs. Crawford explained as she showed Nora around. "They sleep in the bunkhouse, but they take their meals here. Breakfast is at sunrise, dinner at noon, and supper at sundown. On Sundays, I usually make something special, a roast or a pie. The men work hard, so they eat hearty." She led Nora down a short hallway and opened a door to a small room. It contained a simple bed, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a wooden chest. A window looked out toward the mountains in the distance. This was Martha's room. "It is not much, but it is clean and private. Room and board would be part of your wages, along with $3 a month. I know that is not a lot, but it is what we can manage right now." "That would be more than generous, madam," Nora said, her voice thick with emotion. $3 a month was not much, true, but compared to starving on the streets of Seligman, it seemed like a fortune. Mrs. Crawford smiled, her whole face transforming with the expression. "Please call me Margaret. We are not overly formal here. Now, why do not you wash up and rest for a bit? You look absolutely exhausted, poor thing. Supper is not for a few hours yet, so you have got time to recover yourself. Tomorrow will be soon enough to start showing you the routine." "Thank you," Nora whispered. "Thank you so much. You cannot know what this means to me." Margaret reached out and patted Nora's shoulder gently. "I think I can imagine, dear. I came out here as a young bride myself, scared out of my mind and far from everything I knew. Someone showed me kindness then, and I am glad to pass it along now. You are safe here. Whatever you have been through, whatever burdens you carry, You can set them down for a while." After Margaret left, closing the door quietly behind her, Nora sank down onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. The tears came in great heaving sobs, releasing weeks of fear and grief and exhaustion. She cried for Thomas, for the life they had barely begun together. She cried for her parents, dead these 6 years but still missed. She cried for herself, for the girl she had been and the woman she was trying to become. And finally, she cried from sheer relief, because she had found a place, however temporary, where she could rest. When the tears finally subsided, Nora washed her face in the basin, the cool water soothing against her hot skin. She looked around the small room that was now hers, taking in the simple furnishings with a sense of wonder. A room of her own, safety, work. It was more than she had dared hope for just a few hours ago. She lay down on the bed, intending to rest for just a moment, but exhaustion claimed her immediately, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Nora woke, the light coming through the window had taken on the golden quality of late afternoon. She sat up quickly, disoriented for a moment, before remembering where she was. She could hear voices and movement from the main room, the sounds of people gathering for the evening meal. Quickly, she did her best to make herself presentable, smoothing her dress and re-pinning her hair. When she emerged from her room, she found the large table surrounded by men. Margaret was at the stove, ladling stew into bowls, and she looked up with a smile as Nora appeared. "There you are, dear. Feeling better?" "Yes, thank you. I apologize for sleeping so long. I should have been helping you prepare supper." "Nonsense, you needed the rest. Tomorrow you can start earning your keep. Tonight you just eat and meet everyone." Margaret raised her voice slightly. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Nora Hartford. She's going to be helping me around here, so I expect you all to treat her with respect." The men, who had gone quiet when Nora appeared, nodded and murmured greetings. Nora recognized Samuel among them, sitting at the far end of the table. He caught her eye and gave her a slight nod, and she felt absurdly grateful for that small acknowledgement. An older man with a weathered face and gray beard stood and extended his hand. "I am Daniel Crawford, Miss Hartford. Welcome to our ranch. My wife tells me you have come a long way." "Yes, sir, from Missouri. And thank you for allowing me to work here. I am very grateful. Any friend of Samuel's is welcome here, and anyone willing to work hard has a place at this table." He gestured to an empty chair near Margaret. "Please sit. You must be hungry." Nora took the offered seat, and Margaret placed a bowl of stew in front of her along with a thick slice of bread. The smell alone made Nora's mouth water, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, not to wolf down the food like a starving animal, even though that was exactly what she felt like. As the men ate, they talked among themselves about the day's work, discussing cattle and fences and water sources in a language that was foreign to Nora, but which she found herself wanting to understand. She listened quietly, learning their names and trying to match them to faces. There was Jack, a young man not much older than Samuel with red hair and an easy smile. Tom, heavyset and middle-aged, seemed to be the foreman. The others were Pete, Carlos, and Jim, cowboys of various ages who treated each other with the casual familiarity of men who worked closely together. Samuel spoke less than the others, but when he did, the men listened. Nora noticed that he had a thoughtful way of considering things before he spoke, as if he weighed each word carefully. She found herself watching him more than she should, remembering the feel of his solid presence as she rode behind him, the gentleness with which he had offered her water. After supper, the men dispersed to the bunkhouse or to various evening chores. Nora helped Margaret clear the table and wash the dishes, learning the kitchen routine as they worked. Margaret chatted easily, telling Nora about life on the ranch, about her 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, now all grown and gone to start their own lives. "It gets lonely sometimes," Margaret admitted as she dried a plate. "I love my husband dearly, and the men are good company in their way, but I miss having another woman to talk to. I think your being here will be good for both of us." "I hope I can be helpful," Nora said sincerely. "I am sure you will be. You have got a capable look about you once you have got some rest and decent food in you." Margaret paused, studying Nora with kind eyes. "How long were you married, dear?" "Just over a year. Thomas was a good man. We were happy, or at least I think we were starting to be. We were still getting to know each other in many ways when he got sick. And his family could not help you after he passed." Nora felt her jaw tighten. "They made it clear I was not welcome." Margaret shook her head. "Some people have stones where their hearts should be." "Well, their loss is our gain. You are among friends now, Nora. Remember that." That night, lying in her small bed, Nora found herself thinking about Samuel Norton. He had not had to help her. He could have ridden past without stopping, could have left her to figure things out on her own. But he had not. He had offered her water, had brought her here, had given her a chance when she had nothing left. She wondered what kind of man did that for a stranger, and she found herself wanting to know more about him. The next morning, Nora woke before dawn to the sound of Margaret moving around in the kitchen. She dressed quickly and joined her, finding the older woman already mixing biscuit dough. "Good morning," Margaret said cheerfully. "Ready for your first real day of work?" "Yes, madam." "Tell me what you need me to do." Margaret put her to work frying bacon and eggs while she finished the biscuits. By the time the sky began to lighten, the table was laden with food and the men were filing in, bringing with them the smell of horses and leather and the cool morning air. Breakfast was a quieter affair than supper had been, the men still shaking off sleep as they fueled up for the day ahead. Samuel sat in the same spot as the night before, and Nora found herself hyper-aware of his presence. She scolded herself mentally. She was a widow, barely 4 months past losing her husband. She had no business noticing the way the morning light caught in Samuel's dark hair or the quiet competence in the way he moved. After breakfast, as the men headed out for their day's work, Samuel paused near the door. "Miss Hartford, would you have a moment?" Nora looked up from the dishes she was clearing, surprised. "Of course." He stepped outside and she followed, wiping her hands on her apron. The morning air was still cool, a blessed relief from yesterday's heat. Samuel stood a few feet from the porch, his hat in his hands, looking almost uncomfortable. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right," he said. "Mrs. Crawford, she treating you well?" "Very well. Everyone has been kind. I cannot thank you enough for bringing me here." Samuel shrugged slightly. "You needed help. I am glad I could provide it. Still, you did not have to. Most people would have just ridden past." He was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "My mother always said that how you treat people when they are at their lowest tells you what kind of person you really are. I guess I try to live by that. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." She was. The past tense hung in the air between them. "I am sorry," Nora said softly. "It was a long time ago. I was 16. She got pneumonia one winter, and there was not anything the doctor could do." He looked up at her then, his blue-gray eyes meeting hers. "So I guess I understand a little of what it is like to lose someone." Before Nora could respond, Daniel Crawford called out from near the barn, needing Samuel for something. Samuel settled his hat back on his head and nodded to Nora. "I should get to work. If you need anything, just let me or the Crawfords know." "Thank you," Nora said, but he was already walking away, his long strides carrying him quickly across the yard. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Nora rose before dawn to help Margaret prepare breakfast. After the men left for their work, she and Margaret would tackle the day's tasks. Laundry, cleaning, baking, mending, preserving vegetables from the garden, feeding the chickens. The work was hard and constant, but Nora found she did not mind. It felt good to be useful again, to have a purpose beyond simply surviving. Margaret proved to be patient teacher and good company. She taught Nora how to make bread the way the men liked it, how to stretch supplies when necessary, how to keep the house cool during the worst of the afternoon heat. In return, Nora shared what skills she had, and gradually she began to feel less like a charity case and more like a genuine member of the household. The men were respectful, as Daniel had insisted they be. Jack sometimes joked and flirted mildly, but it was harmless, the kind of teasing an older brother might engage in. Tom treated her with grandfatherly kindness. The others simply nodded politely and went about their business, but Samuel remained something of a puzzle. He was always courteous, always helpful if she needed something heavy moved or a repair done. But he kept a certain distance, rarely engaging in the easy banter that sometimes developed during meals. Nora told herself it did not matter, that she barely knew him anyway, but she found herself disappointed nonetheless. 2 weeks after her arrival, Nora was hanging laundry behind the house when she heard a commotion from the direction of the barn. Raised voices, the sound of horses moving quickly. She dropped the sheet she was holding and hurried around the side of the house to see what was happening. Several of the men were mounted up, Daniel among them. Margaret had come out onto the porch, her hand shading her eyes as she looked toward her husband. "What is it?" Nora asked, joining Margaret. "Cattle rustlers, probably. Tom found signs of them on the East Range this morning. They took at least a dozen head during the night." Margaret's voice was tight with worry. "Daniel and the boys are going to see if they can track them." Nora watched as Samuel swung into his saddle, his movements quick and efficient. He had a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle, and the sight of it made Nora's stomach clench with sudden fear. This was not just ranch work. This could be dangerous. The men rode off in a cloud of dust, and Margaret sighed. "Come on, dear. No point standing here worrying. We have got work to do." But Nora found it hard to concentrate for the rest of the day. Every sound made her look up, hoping to see the men returning. Margaret must have noticed because she patted Nora's hand at one point and said, "They will be fine. Daniel has been dealing with rustlers since we first came here. The boys know what they are doing." "Have there been many problems with rustlers?" Nora asked. "It comes and goes. Sometimes months will pass with no trouble, then suddenly we will lose cattle here and there. It is part of life out here, unfortunately. The law is spread too thin to do much about it, so ranchers have to protect their own property." The men did not return until well after dark. Nora had helped Margaret keep supper warm, both of them trying not to show their anxiety. When they finally heard horses in the yard, Margaret hurried to the door, Nora close behind her. The men looked tired and dusty, but they all seemed unharmed. Nora found herself scanning their faces, her eyes lingering on Samuel, perhaps longer than they should have. "Did you find them?" Margaret asked as Daniel dismounted. "We tracked them for about 10 miles, but they had too much of a head start. We will try again tomorrow, see if we can pick up their trail." He sounded frustrated and exhausted. "Right now, I think we could all use some food and rest." The men ate quickly and quietly, too tired for much conversation. Nora moved around the table, refilling coffee cups and bringing more bread, acutely aware of the tension that hung in the air. This was the reality of frontier life, she realized. It was not just hard work and beautiful landscapes. There was real danger here, real threats to livelihood and possibly even to life itself. After the men had gone to the bunkhouse, Nora helped Margaret clean up. Neither of them spoke much, both lost in their own thoughts. When Nora finally made her way to her small room, she found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She kept thinking about Samuel riding off after potentially dangerous men, kept imagining all the things that could have gone wrong. She barely knew him, she reminded herself. He had been kind to her, but that did not mean she should be lying awake worrying about him. Yet she could not seem to stop the concern that gnawed at her. Over the next few days, the men continued to search for signs of the rustlers, but with no success. The cattle were gone, and there was nothing to be done about it. Life on the ranch returned to its normal routine, but Nora sensed an undercurrent of vigilance that had not been there before. The men rode out in pairs now, and Daniel instructed Margaret to keep the rifle near the kitchen door, just in case. It was about 3 weeks after Nora's arrival when she found herself alone with Samuel for the first time since that morning conversation outside the house. Margaret had sent her to the barn to collect eggs from the nests some of the hens had made there, preferring the dim coolness to the chicken coop. Nora was reaching carefully into a nest tucked in the corner when she heard someone enter the barn behind her. She turned to find Samuel leading his horse in, probably to remove her saddle after the day's work. He looked surprised to see her there. "Sorry," he said. "Did not mean to startle you." "You did not," Nora lied, pressing a hand to her racing heart. "I am just collecting eggs." He nodded and led Rosie to her stall, beginning the process of unsaddling her. Nora went back to her egg gathering, but she was intensely aware of his presence, of the quiet sounds he made as he worked. She had collected half a dozen eggs when she heard him speak. "You have settled in well here," he said, not looking at her, focusing on brushing down Rosie's coat. "Mrs. Crawford says you are a hard worker. I try to be. Everyone has been very kind to me." "It is a good place," Samuel agreed. "Good people." Silence fell again, but Nora found she did not want it to. She wanted to understand this quiet man who had changed her life. "You said you came from Colorado," she ventured. "Do you have family there still?" "No. My father died when I was young, just a boy. My mother remarried, but her new husband did not much care for having another man's child around. I left when I was 17, been on my own since then." "That must have been difficult." Samuel shrugged, but there was something in the set of his shoulders that suggested it had been more than difficult. "It taught me to take care of myself, taught me what kind of man I wanted to be, which was the opposite of my stepfather." "Was he cruel to you?" "To me, to my mother. I wanted to stay, to protect her, but she told me to go. Said I would have a better chance at life if I left. I sent her letters when I could, money when I had it. Then about 2 years ago I got word that she had passed. Turned out my stepfather had drunk himself to death a few months before her, so at least she had some peace at the end." "I am so sorry, Samuel." He finally looked at her then, and the expression in his eyes was complex, a mixture of old pain and acceptance. "We all have our sorrows to carry, I guess. At least I had her for as long as I did. She was a good woman, deserved better than what life gave her." Nora found herself moving closer, the basket of eggs forgotten on her arm. "She raised a good man. I think that counts for something." Samuel's expression softened slightly. "That is kind of you to say. It is true. You helped me when you had no reason to. You gave me a chance when I had none left. That speaks to the kind of person you are." He looked uncomfortable with the praise, ducking his head slightly. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Nora said firmly. "Not anyone. Most people would have ridden right past, but you did not." "Why?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his hand stilling on Rosie's neck. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Because I saw in your eyes what I felt when I left Colorado. That desperate, lost look of someone who has nowhere else to turn. I remembered what that felt like, and I could not just leave you there." The honesty of his words struck something deep in Nora's chest. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you. I do not think I ever properly thanked you for that." He looked down at her hand on his arm, and Nora suddenly realized how forward she was being. She started to pull back, but Samuel covered her hand with his own, holding it in place. "You are welcome," he said quietly. "I am glad I was there that day." They stood like that for a moment, frozen in a tableau that felt charged with something Nora could not quite name. Then Rosie shifted in her stall, breaking the spell, and they both stepped back, suddenly awkward. "I should get these eggs to Margaret," Nora said, her voice not quite steady, "and I should finish up here." Nora hurried out of the barn, her heart pounding. What had just happened? And why did she feel like something fundamental had shifted? That night at supper, Nora found it hard not to look at Samuel, hard not to remember the feel of his hand over hers. She scolded herself mentally. She was being foolish. Samuel had been kind to her, that was all. She was reading too much into simple gestures, probably because she was lonely and displaced and vulnerable. But over the following days, she began to notice things she had missed before. The way Samuel always seemed to choose to sit where he could see her during meals. The way his eyes would sometimes find hers across the room, holding her gaze for a moment before looking away. The way he would linger after breakfast or supper, finding small tasks to do around the house that kept him near. Margaret noticed too. One afternoon, while she and Nora were kneading bread together, the older woman gave Nora a knowing look. "Samuel is a good man," Margaret said, seemingly out of nowhere. Nora felt her cheeks heat. "Yes, he seems to be. He has been with us 3 years, and in all that time, I have never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you." "Margaret," Nora protested, but the older woman just laughed. "I am not blind, dear, and neither are you. I see the way you watch him too. There is nothing wrong with that. You are both young, both alone. It would be natural if feelings developed." "It has only been 4 months since Thomas died," Nora said quietly. "Is it wrong that I find myself thinking about another man?" Margaret's expression gentled. "Oh, honey, no, it is not wrong. You are alive, and life keeps moving forward whether we are ready or not. Thomas would not want you to mourn him forever, would he?" "No, I suppose not. He was a practical man. He would probably tell me I was being silly, wasting time on grief when I could be building a new life." Then listen to that wisdom. I am not saying you need to rush into anything, but if your heart is beginning to open to someone new, do not close it out of misplaced guilt. You deserve happiness, Nora. You deserve love. The word love seemed too large, too significant for what Nora was feeling. But there was something growing between her and Samuel, something tender and tentative but unmistakably real. She could not deny that anymore. The end of August brought slightly cooler temperatures and the first hints that summer would not last forever. One Sunday afternoon, after the dinner dishes had been cleared and Margaret had shooed Nora out of the kitchen, telling her to go enjoy the beautiful day, Nora found herself walking toward the creek that ran along the southern edge of the ranch property. She had discovered this spot a week earlier, a place where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water ran clear over smooth stones. It was peaceful here, away from the constant activity of the ranch, and Nora had taken to coming here when she had a spare moment to sit and think. She had been there perhaps 15 minutes, sitting on a flat rock with her feet dangling in the cool water when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Samuel approaching, looking almost hesitant. "I hope I am not intruding," he said. "Mrs. Crawford mentioned you had walked this way." "You are not intruding," Nora said, meaning it. "Please sit if you would like." Samuel settled onto the rock beside her, leaving a respectable distance between them. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow past, listening to the rustle of leaves overhead. "This is a good spot," Samuel finally said. "Peaceful." "I thought so too. It reminds me a little of a place I used to go back in Missouri near my parents' farm. There was a stream there, and I would go sit by it when I needed to think. What do you think about when you come here?" Nora considered the question. "Everything. Nothing. How strange it is that my life has changed so completely in just a few months. How I barely recognize myself anymore." "Do you miss Missouri?" "Your old life, parts of it," Nora admitted. "I miss my parents, though they have been gone for years now. I miss the feeling of belonging somewhere, of knowing my place in the world. But the life I had there, even before Thomas died, it was not really mine. It was what was expected of me, what I fell into because I did not know what else to do. Coming here, as terrifying as it has been, it feels like maybe I have a chance to figure out who I actually am." Samuel nodded slowly. "I understand that. When I left Colorado, I was angry and hurt and lost. But being on my own, having to figure things out for myself, it made me into someone I could actually respect. It was not easy, but it was necessary." "Do you ever get lonely?" Nora asked, then immediately felt foolish. "I am sorry, that is too personal a question." "No, it is all right." Samuel was quiet for a moment, staring at the water. "Yes, I get lonely sometimes. The men in the bunkhouse, they are good friends in their way, but it is not the same as having someone who really knows you, really sees you. Someone you can talk to about more than just work and weather." He turned to look at her then, and Nora found herself unable to look away from his blue-gray eyes. "I have enjoyed talking with you these past weeks," he continued, his voice soft. "It has made me realize how much I have missed having that kind of connection with someone." Nora's heart was beating faster now, and she felt suddenly breathless. "I have enjoyed talking with you too." "Nora," Samuel said, and the way he said her name, with such gentleness and care, made something in her chest tighten. "I know your husband has not been gone long. I know you are still grieving, and I do not want to disrespect that or rush you into anything. But I need you to know that I care about you, more than I probably should, given the circumstances. You have been on my mind constantly since the day I met you." Nora felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I care about you too," she whispered. "I have tried to tell myself it is too soon, that I am being foolish, but I cannot seem to help it." Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle but firm. "So what do we do about this?" he asked. "I do not know," Nora admitted. "I have never been in this situation before. When I married Thomas, it was practical, sensible. We liked each other well enough, and it seemed like the right thing to do. But this," she gestured between them, "this feels different. It feels like something I have been waiting for my whole life without knowing it." "Then maybe we just take it slow," Samuel suggested. "Maybe we just spend time together, get to know each other better, and see where it leads. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who enjoy each other's company." "I would like that," Nora said, and she smiled. A genuine smile that felt like it came from somewhere deep inside her. Samuel smiled back, and it transformed his usually serious face into something almost boyish. "Good. That makes me happy." They sat by the creek until the sun began to lower in the sky, talking about everything and nothing. Samuel told her about learning to rope cattle, about sleeping under the stars, about the time he had gotten lost in the mountains for 3 days and survived on berries and creek water. Nora told him about growing up on her parents' farm, about the books she used to love reading, about her dream of someday seeing the ocean. "I will take you there someday," Samuel said with such conviction that Nora almost believed it was possible. "When we have saved enough money, when the time is right, I will take you to California and you can see the Pacific." "That sounds like a dream," Nora said softly. "Dreams can come true," Samuel replied. "Sometimes anyway, if you want them badly enough." From that day forward, Nora and Samuel spent as much time together as their work allowed. They fell into a pattern of meeting at the creek on Sunday afternoons, their one guaranteed time away from the demands of the ranch. They talked for hours, sharing their histories, their hopes, their fears. Samuel told her about the loneliness of his childhood, the violence of his stepfather, the ache of losing his mother. Nora told him about the emptiness she had felt in her marriage to Thomas, the guilt she carried for not loving him the way she thought a wife should, the terror of finding herself alone in the world. "You have nothing to feel guilty about," Samuel told her one afternoon as they sat beneath the cottonwoods. "You cannot force yourself to feel something you do not. You were kind to him, you were faithful to him, you tried to make a life with him. That is more than many people do." "But I feel like I cheated him somehow," Nora confessed. "Like he deserved someone who loved him with her whole heart, and I could not give him that." "Did he love you with his whole heart?" The question stopped Nora short. She thought about it, really thought about it for the first time. "I do not know," she finally said. "I think he cared for me. I think he was glad to have a wife, to have someone to keep his house and share his bed. But I do not know if he truly loved me, not the way I have heard love described, not the way I am beginning to understand it now." Samuel reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "I am glad I found you that day in Seligman," he said softly. "Even though I know the circumstances that brought you there were painful, I cannot help but be grateful that you were there when I rode through." "So am I," Nora whispered. They kissed for the first time that afternoon, a sweet, tentative kiss that held the promise of everything to come. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I have never felt this way before," Nora admitted. "With Thomas, everything was so measured, so practical. This feels wild and terrifying and wonderful all at once." "That is how it should feel," Samuel said. "That is how you know it is real." As September gave way to October, their relationship deepened. They were careful to be circumspect around the others, not wanting to cause gossip or make anyone uncomfortable, but Margaret knew, and Daniel probably suspected. The older couple seemed pleased rather than concerned, which made things easier. One evening, after supper, Samuel asked Nora if she would like to go for a ride the next day, his day off. "I want to show you something," he said. "Something special." Nora agreed readily, excited at the prospect of a whole day with Samuel. The next morning, after breakfast, he saddled up 2 horses, Rosie and a gentle gelding named Buck. Nora had been practicing her riding, knowing it was an essential skill in this country, and she was able to mount Buck without assistance. They rode out from the ranch toward the mountains that rose to the east. The morning was cool and clear, perfect for riding, and Nora found herself relaxing into the rhythm of Buck's gait, enjoying the feel of the sun on her face and the breeze in her hair. Samuel led them along paths only he seemed to know, winding through scrubland and over small rises. They startled a deer at one point, watching it bound away with graceful leaps. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing across the vast openness. After about 2 hours, they began to climb into the foothills, and the landscape changed. More trees appeared, juniper and pine, providing welcome shade. The air grew cooler and smelled of resin and earth. Finally, Samuel brought them to a stop in a small meadow surrounded by tall pines. A spring bubbled up from the rocks at one end, creating a small pool before overflowing and running down the mountainside. Wildflowers dotted the grass, and the view stretched out across the valley below, showing the ranch as a tiny collection of buildings in the distance. "This is beautiful," Nora breathed, sliding down from Buck's back. "I found this place about a year ago," Samuel said, dismounting as well. I come here sometimes when I need to think, when I need to get away from everything. I have never brought anyone else here before." Nora turned to him, touched by the implication. "Thank you for sharing it with me." They spread out a blanket Samuel had brought in his saddlebag and unpacked the lunch Margaret had prepared for them. Bread, cheese, cold chicken, apples, and a jar of lemonade. They ate slowly, talking and laughing, completely at ease with each other. After they had eaten, Samuel lay back on the blanket, his hands behind his head, staring up at the sky. Nora lay down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Above them, clouds drifted past in lazy patterns. "I have been thinking," Samuel said after a while, "about the future. About what I want from life." "And what do you want?" Nora asked quietly. "Land of my own, eventually. Not a huge spread like the Crawfords have, but enough to run a small herd, build a house, make a real home. I have been saving my wages for 3 years now, putting aside every penny I do not absolutely need. I figure another year or two, and I will have enough to buy some land, maybe a few head of cattle to start." "That sounds like a good dream," Nora said. Samuel turned his head to look at her. "I want you to be part of that dream, Nora. I know it is early, I know we have not been together long, but I need you to know my intentions. I am not just passing time with you, I am thinking about forever." Nora's breath caught in her throat. "Samuel." "You do not have to answer now," he said quickly. "I am not asking you to marry me right this second. I just want you to know where my heart is, what I am hoping for. I want to build a life with you, Nora. I want to give you a home, a family if you want one, a place where you belong." Tears filled Nora's eyes, but they were happy tears. "I want that too," she said. "I want all of that with you. It scares me how much I want it, how quickly I have come to need you." Samuel rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look down at her properly. "Then we will make it happen. It might take time, we might have to work hard and save and be patient, but we will get there. I promise you that." "I believe you," Nora said, reaching up to touch his face. He leaned down and kissed her, and this kiss was different from their previous ones. It held passion and promise, a glimpse of the future they were beginning to build together. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. They spent the rest of the afternoon in that hidden meadow, talking about their dreams and plans. Samuel told her about the piece of land he had his eye on, about 5 miles west of the Crawford Ranch, near good water and with enough grazing to support a small herd. Nora told him about the garden she wanted to plant, the chickens she wanted to keep, the home she wanted to create. "I have never had that," she admitted. "A home that was truly mine, that I built from nothing. My parents' farm was always their place, even after they died. And with Thomas, I was just moving into his family's world, trying to fit into a space that was not really meant for me. But this, what we are talking about, this would be ours, something we create together." "Exactly," Samuel said, squeezing her hand. "Our place, our rules, our life." As the sun began to lower, they reluctantly packed up and headed back toward the ranch. Nora felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years. For the first time since Thomas had died, since her world had fallen apart, she felt like she had something to look forward to, a reason to keep moving forward. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Nora's life. She continued her work helping Margaret, but everything seemed brighter now, touched with the joy of her growing love for Samuel. They were careful not to be too obvious in front of the other ranch hands, but everyone seemed to know anyway, and no one seemed to mind. If anything, the men seemed pleased that Samuel had found someone, and they treated Nora with even more respect than before. One evening in late October, after supper, Daniel asked Samuel to join him on the porch. Nora watched them go, wondering what they were discussing. When Samuel came back inside about 20 minutes later, he looked pleased. "Mr. Crawford wants to talk to both of us," he said to Nora. "In the morning after breakfast." "About what?" Nora asked, but Samuel just smiled mysteriously. "You will find out tomorrow." That night, Nora lay in bed wondering and worrying. Had they been too obvious? Was Daniel going to tell them their relationship was inappropriate? But Samuel had not looked worried, so it could not be that. The next morning seemed to take forever. Finally, after the dishes were cleared and the men had headed out for the day's work, Daniel asked Nora and Samuel to sit at the table. Margaret joined them, a knowing smile on her face. "I am going to get right to the point," Daniel said, looking between them. "Margaret and I have watched you two over these past months. We see how you care for each other and we approve. Samuel, you have been one of my best hands, reliable and hardworking. Nora, you have been a blessing to Margaret and to our household. We consider both of you part of our family now." He paused, and Samuel reached under the table to take Nora's hand. "Samuel has told me about his plan to buy land and start his own place," Daniel continued. "That piece of property you have been eyeing west of here. The owner is willing to sell, and I have spoken to him about holding it for you until you have the funds. But I have another proposal for you both to consider." Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "I am not getting any younger, and truth is, this ranch is getting to be more than Margaret and I can manage, especially with our children all gone and living their own lives. We need someone we trust to help run things, to take some of the burden off our shoulders. Samuel, I want to make you foreman. It comes with better pay, and I would give you a percentage of the profits from the cattle sales. It would mean you could save for your own land faster." Samuel looked stunned. "Mr. Crawford, I do not know what to say. That is incredibly generous." "You have earned it," Daniel said firmly. "But there is more. That piece of land you want to buy, I own it. I bought it 2 years ago thinking I might expand, but I have realized I do not need more land. I need good people around me. So here is what I am proposing. You two get married, and I will give you that land as a wedding gift, 120 acres with water rights. You would still work here as foreman, Samuel, but you would be building your own place at the same time, working toward your future." Nora felt tears spilling down her cheeks. She could not quite believe what she was hearing. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Nora's free hand. "We want to do this," she said warmly. "We want to help you build the life you deserve. Both of you have had hard times, and you have both worked so hard. Let us give you this leg up." Samuel's grip on Nora's hand tightened. "I do not know how to thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is more than I ever dared hope for." "Thank us by being happy," Daniel said simply. "Thank us by building a good life together. That is all the thanks we need." After Daniel and Margaret left them alone, Samuel turned to Nora, his eyes bright. "This changes everything," he said. "With this land, with the form and salary, we could be married within a month. We could start building our house right away, have it ready by spring. Nora, we could actually do this, have everything we have been dreaming about." "I cannot believe this is real," Nora whispered. "It feels too good to be true." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "It is real. We are getting our chance, Nora. Our chance at a real life, a real home, a real future, together." Nora buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed with emotion. 6 months ago, she had been standing in Seligman with nothing, absolutely nothing, believing her life was essentially over. And now she had everything. A man she loved who loved her back, a community that had embraced her, and the promise of a home to call her own. "Will you marry me?" Samuel asked softly, pulling back so he could see her face. "Properly, I mean. I know we have talked about it, but I want to ask you officially. Nora Hartford, will you be my wife?" "Yes," Nora said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course I will marry you. He kissed her then, not caring that they were still in the main house where anyone could walk in. It was a kiss full of joy and promise and love, and Nora felt like her heart might burst from the happiness flooding through her. They were married 3 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the ranch. Margaret made Nora a dress from fabric they bought in Seligman, a simple but beautiful gown of pale blue cotton. Samuel wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, looking more handsome than Nora had ever seen him. A traveling preacher who made regular circuits through the territory performed the ceremony. All the ranch hands were there, cleaned up and on their best behavior, along with several neighboring ranchers and their families. It was a small gathering, but it felt perfect to Nora, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about them. When the preacher asked if Samuel took Nora to be his wife, his "I do" rang out clear and strong. And when Nora said the same, she meant it with every fiber of her being. This was not like her marriage to Thomas, entered into out of practicality and convention. This was a choice made from love, a commitment she was making with her whole heart. After the ceremony, Margaret had prepared a feast: roasted chickens, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and a cake that must have taken her hours to make. Everyone ate and drank and celebrated, and Nora felt surrounded by warmth and goodwill. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Samuel took Nora's hand and led her away from the main house. They walked to where a tent had been set up near the site where their future house would stand. It was temporary accommodation until they could build something permanent, but Samuel had made it comfortable with blankets and pillows and a small stove for warmth. "Our first home," he said with a smile, holding open the tent flap for her. Nora stepped inside, then turned to face him. "Our home," she agreed. That night, in the quiet privacy of their tent with the vast Arizona sky stretched above them and the sounds of the desert all around, Nora and Samuel began their life together as husband and wife. It was tender and passionate, and unlike anything Nora had experienced in her brief marriage to Thomas. This was what it was supposed to feel like, she realized. This connection, this intimacy, this sense of two people becoming one. This was love. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together beneath the blankets, Samuel traced patterns on Nora's shoulder with his fingertips. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," Nora said honestly. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I had nothing left, nothing to offer anyone. I felt worthless and alone." Samuel pulled her closer. "Do you remember what I told you that day we met?" Nora thought back to that afternoon by the creek when their relationship had begun to shift into something more. "You said a lot of things that day." "No, I mean the very first day, when you said you had nothing beautiful to give." Nora frowned slightly, trying to remember. The details of that desperate afternoon in Seligman were hazy, blurred by exhaustion and fear. "I do not remember saying that." "You were standing there, looking so lost and scared, and you said something about having nothing to offer, nothing beautiful to give. And I told you, you are standing right here, because you were the beautiful thing, Nora. Not something you had or something you could offer. You. Just you, exactly as you were." Tears filled Nora's eyes again, but they were tears of joy. "I did not believe you then. I could not understand what you meant." "Do you understand now?" "Yes," Nora whispered. "Yes, I do. Good, because you are everything to me. Everything I need, everything I want. You are more than enough, Nora. You always have been." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and when Nora woke the next morning to see her husband's face in the early light, she felt a peace she had never known before. This was where she was meant to be. With this man in this place, building this life. The following months were busy ones. During the day, Samuel continued his work as foreman, managing the ranch hands and helping Daniel with the larger decisions about the operation. In the evenings and on Sundays, he worked on their house, and Nora worked alongside him. She learned to hammer nails and fit boards, to mix mortar and lay stone. Her hands became calloused, her muscles grew stronger, and she felt pride in every piece of their home that they built together. The other ranch hands often helped when they had time, and even Daniel would come by to lend a hand or offer advice. Slowly, steadily, the house took shape. It was not large, just 2 rooms to start with, but it had a solid stone fireplace, real glass windows, and a roof that would not leak. To Nora, it was a palace. By late February of 1884, the house was complete enough for them to move in. They spent their first night there huddled by the fireplace, sitting on the floor because they did not have furniture yet, eating bread and cheese and laughing at how empty the rooms looked. "We will fill it," Samuel said, looking around with satisfaction. "A little at a time, we will make it a real home." And they did. Over the following months, Samuel built a table and chairs, a bed frame, shelves for their few dishes and books. Nora sewed curtains from fabric Margaret helped her buy, made a quilt for their bed, planted a garden behind the house. They bought chickens, and Nora tended them carefully, gathering eggs each morning and feeling absurdly pleased by this small abundance. Samuel bought 6 head of cattle with money he had saved, the beginning of their own herd. It was not much, but it was a start, and they both understood that great things could grow from small beginnings. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Samuel worked at the Crawford Ranch during the day, learning everything he could from Daniel about managing cattle and land, and the business side of ranching. Nora continued to help Margaret a few days a week, both because they needed the extra money and because she genuinely enjoyed the older woman's company. The rest of her time was spent tending her own home, her garden, her chickens, building the life she had always wanted. She and Samuel talked every evening, sharing their days, making plans for the future. They laughed together, worked together, loved together. Nora had never been so happy, had never felt so complete. This was what marriage was supposed to be, she realized. This partnership, this teamwork, this deep, abiding love that grew stronger with each passing day. By summer, Nora suspected she might be pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Samuel, not wanting to get his hopes up prematurely. But when she finally told him one evening in early July, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Nora asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Samuel said, kneeling down so he was level with her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your father is very excited to meet you." Nora ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man and for the child growing inside her. "Thank you," she said softly. Samuel looked up at her, puzzled. "For what? For finding me, for saving me, for giving me all of this." "I did not give you anything," Samuel said, standing and pulling her into his arms. "We built this together. You saved yourself, Nora. You had the courage to leave everything behind and start over. You had the strength to keep going when most people would have given up. All I did was point you in the right direction. You did more than that, and you know it. Well, maybe we saved each other then. How about that?" Nora smiled against his chest. "I can accept that." Their daughter was born the following February, in the small house they had built together, with Margaret attending as midwife. It was a long and difficult labor, but when Nora finally held her daughter for the first time, she thought it was the most beautiful child she had ever seen. "What should we name her?" Samuel asked, looking down at his daughter with absolute adoration. "What about Rose?" Nora suggested. "After your horse, the one who carried us both that first day." Samuel's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "Rosie brought you into my life. That seems fitting. Rose it is." Little Rose Norton was a healthy, loud baby who demanded attention and gave it freely in return. Samuel proved to be a wonderful father, patient and gentle, talking to his daughter as if she could understand every word. Nora would often find him holding the baby in the evenings, telling her stories about his day, about the cattle and the land and the big world she would grow up in. "You will never have to feel alone like I did," he would whisper to her. "You will always know you are loved. Always." As Rose grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Samuel was proving to be an excellent foreman, and under his management, the Crawford Ranch had its best years yet. He and Nora slowly built up their own herd as well, now up to about 30 head of cattle. It was still small compared to the Crawford operation, but it was theirs, earned through hard work and careful planning. When Rose was 2, Nora found herself pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a son, whom they named Daniel after the man who had given them their start. The boy had his father's dark hair and serious eyes, and from early on, it was clear he would have his father's temperament as well, thoughtful and steady. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. Samuel and Nora added onto their house, building 2 more rooms as their family expanded. Their herd grew slowly but surely. Samuel continued to work for the Crawfords, but he was now essentially a partner in the operation, with Daniel relying on him more and more as the older man's health began to decline. When Daniel Crawford passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1891, he left the ranch jointly to his 3 children and to Samuel, recognizing the crucial role Samuel had played in its success. It was an incredible gift, one that secured Samuel and Nora's future beyond anything they had imagined. The Crawford children, all settled in their own lives, were happy to have Samuel continue running the ranch, and arrangements were made that allowed Samuel to essentially manage the entire operation while they received a percentage of the profits. Margaret lived another 5 years after her husband, passing away in 1896. Before she died, she told Nora, "You have made me so happy, dear. Watching you and Samuel build your life, seeing your beautiful children, knowing that I played even a small part in your happiness, it means everything to me. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something beautiful. Never forget how strong you are." Those words stayed with Nora long after Margaret was gone. By the turn of the century, Samuel and Nora had 4 children, Rose, Daniel, and 2 more sons, William and James. Their modest beginning of 6 cattle had grown to a herd of over 300, combined with their management of the larger Crawford operation. They had built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams, but more than the material success, they had built something even more valuable. A family filled with love, a home filled with warmth, a partnership that grew stronger with each passing year. One evening in the summer of 1903, Samuel and Nora sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the land they had worked for nearly 20 years. The children were inside, the older ones helping the younger with their evening chores, their voices drifting out through the open windows. "Do you ever think about that day in Seligman?" Samuel asked, taking Nora's hand in his. "The day we met." "All the time," Nora said. "I think about how desperate I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And then you came riding up, offering water to a stranger." "You looked like you were about to fall over," Samuel remembered. "And when you took that water, you looked at me like I had just performed a miracle." "You did perform a miracle, in a way. You gave me hope when I had none left. You saw something in me worth saving." Samuel squeezed her hand. I saw you, Nora, that was all. I just saw you standing there in the dust trying to be brave. And I thought to myself, there is someone worth knowing. There is someone special. I told you I had nothing to give, Nora said softly, the memory clear even after all these years. I remember that now. I said I had nothing beautiful to offer anyone, that I was worthless. And I told you that you were standing right there, because you were the beautiful thing, not anything you owned or could provide. You, just you. Nora leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the colors paint the sky as the sun disappeared. You taught me to see myself differently. You taught me that I was enough, just as I was, that my worth was not in what I could do for others, but in simply being myself. You taught me things too, Samuel said. You taught me what love really looks like, what it means to build something with someone. You taught me that taking a chance on someone, opening your heart even when it is scary, that is always worth it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of their children, their cattle lowing in the distance, the evening breeze rustling through the cottonwoods they had planted near the house years ago. No regrets? Samuel asked eventually. Not a single one, Nora said firmly. You? Only that I did not find you sooner, Nora smiled. We found each other at exactly the right time. Any sooner and we would not have been ready for each other. We had to go through what we went through to become the people who could build this life. Wise words from a wise woman, Samuel said, kissing the top of her head. I learned from the best. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rose emerged from the house, now a young woman of 18 and beautiful like her mother. Mama, Papa, dinner is ready whenever you are. We will be right there, Nora called back. But for another moment they sat there, holding hands and watching the night settle over the land that was theirs, the life they had built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. It had been 20 years since that August day in Seligman when their paths had crossed, and every year had been a gift, every day a new adventure. Ready? Samuel asked, standing and pulling Nora to her feet. Always, Nora said, and together they walked inside to join their children, to share a meal in the home they had built, to continue living the beautiful life they had created together. Their story became something of a legend in that part of Arizona territory. People talked about the widow who had arrived with nothing and the cowboy who had stopped to help her, about how they had built something extraordinary from almost nothing. But to Samuel and Nora, it was never about the legend or the success. It was about the choice they had made that day in Seligman to see value in a chance encounter, to believe in possibility when everything looked impossible, to trust that sometimes the most beautiful things in life are not the ones we own or achieve, but the connections we make with other people. Years later, when they were old and gray, their children grown with families of their own, someone asked Nora what the secret was to a happy life. She thought about it for a long moment before answering. The secret is knowing that you are enough, she finally said. That you do not need to be perfect or wealthy or accomplished to be worthy of love. You just need to be yourself, authentically and bravely. And if you are very lucky, you will find someone who sees that truth in you, even when you cannot see it yourself. Someone who reminds you that the most beautiful thing you have to offer the world is simply your presence in it. That, Samuel added, putting his arm around his wife of more than 4 decades, and never underestimating the power of offering water to a thirsty stranger. They laughed together, as they had laughed countless times over the years, and the sound of their joy echoed out across the land they had claimed, the life they had built, the love they had nurtured into something that would outlast them both, living on in their children and grandchildren, and the stories told around fires on cold desert nights. Samuel Norton and Nora Hartford Norton had taken the broken pieces of their separate lives and forged them into something whole and beautiful and lasting. And it all started with a simple act of kindness on a dusty street in Seligman, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1883, when a cowboy offered water to a desperate widow and saw in her not someone who needed saving, but someone worth knowing, worth loving, worth building a life with. That was the real miracle, the one they marveled at until their final days. Not that they had succeeded in building a prosperous ranch, or raising healthy children, or becoming respected members of their community. The miracle was that they had found each other at all, that they had recognized in each other the possibility of love and chosen to pursue it, even when it would have been easier to walk away. The miracle was that two broken, lonely people had come together and made each other whole. And every time Nora looked at Samuel, right up until the end, she remembered standing in that dusty street, believing she had nothing left to offer the world. She remembered his words, simple but profound. "You are standing right here," as if her mere existence was gift enough. As if she, just as she was all he needed, because it turned out she was. They were enough for each other exactly as they were, and from that enough they built everything. Their story ended the way all good stories should, with love, with family, with a life well lived and no regrets. Samuel passed first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Nora holding his hand. She followed him just 6 months later, unable to bear being apart from him for long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, under the vast Arizona sky that had witnessed their whole journey together. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, and as they stood around those graves, the story was told again. The story of the day Samuel Norton found Nora Hartford in Seligman with nothing but the clothes on her back and a broken heart. The story of how he saw past the dirt and desperation to the beautiful woman beneath. The story of how love can bloom in the most unlikely places, how hope can be found in the darkest moments, how two people can create something extraordinary from nothing but faith in each other. And somewhere in that gathered crowd, a young woman facing her own struggles, her own uncertainties, heard that story and took hope from it. Because that is what love stories do. They remind us that better days are possible, that we are all worthy of love, that even when we feel like we have nothing to offer, our presence in the world matters, that we are enough, just as we are. And sometimes, if we are very fortunate, we meet someone who helps us see that truth. Someone who looks at us on our worst day and sees not our failures or our losses, but our infinite potential. Someone who says, in word or deed or simply by their steadfast presence, "You are standing right here," and that is more than enough. That is everything.